Good afternoon and welcome to our members and our guests. My name is Stephen Longmire and I'm this year's president of the DIA. Due to the current global pandemic, we've opted to still hold our meetings, but as a virtual session with our second webinar this time. The two key mandates of the Digital Imaging Association are to provide education and networking opportunities for our members. At this time, we have to forego the physical networking for everyone's personal safety, but I hope you find this educational aspect worthwhile, and we look forward to your feedback. If you're joining us as a guest today, please consider joining the Digital Imaging Association. Today's session is an example of the high caliber meetings that we run. If you would like more information on membership, please contact either myself or Marg McLeod. Another important piece of business is to thank and acknowledge our sponsors. The Digital Imaging Association attributes a large part of our success to the ongoing support of our sponsors. Our platinum sponsors are EFI, HP, Konica Minolta, Print Action, Spicers, and Xerox. Our gold sponsors are Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, and Heidelberg. At this point, I'd like to introduce our topic for today. With COVID-19, what you need to know as an employer and/or as an employee. We've assembled a panel of experts from different perspectives. From Human Resources, Susan D. Norton, Human Resource Country Manager for HP Canada. Legal, Chantel Goldsmith, Employment Lawyer, Partner at Samfiru Tumarkin LLP. Finance, Jason Roth, CPA, CA, Heidelberg, Canada, Vice President, Finance and Operations, Business Partner, Americas. During today's webinar, we will be accepting questions from our attendees. Please submit them on the Questions tab on your right-hand side of the screen. If you wish to direct your questions to a specific panelist, please indicate their name in the question. If you do not indicate a name, I will pose the question to the panel as a whole. Please note that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Digital Imaging Association member site post-webinar. At this point, I would like to introduce Susan D. Norton, Human Resource Country Manager, HP Canada. HP Incorporated, together with its subsidiaries, provides personal computing and other access devices, imaging and printing products, and related technologies, solutions, and services worldwide. The company operates through three segments: personal systems, printing, and corporate investments. The printing segment provides consumer and commercial printing hardware, supplies, solutions, and services, as well as scanning devices. HP was founded in 1939 and reinvented in 2015 and is headquartered in Palo Alto, California. HP Canada Incorporated is a wholly owned subsidiary of HP Inc. and headquartered in Mississauga, Ontario. At this point, I'd like to welcome Sue to introduce her slide.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, and good day, everyone. It's really important to note that some of us are working from home for the first time on a regular basis, but then you overlay that with us working from home during a global pandemic, and I think we'll all agree it's not easy. So what I wanted to do was take a bit of time to share some work from home tips that I did find helpful as an employee. So the first one is around creating a routine. And I know that's not always easy, since now you may have many things happening around you, such as homeschooling, etc. But wherever possible, set a routine or schedule for your day to be as close as possible to what it used to be when you were back in the office. It really helps things feel a bit more normalized and signals to your brain that it's work time. So things like getting dressed, and I'm not saying, formal business attire unless that's your thing, but maybe not being in your pajamas all day either. Taking a lunch break away from your desk, really setting your hours, those will help in setting a routine. The other thing is to really choose the most optimal work location in your home and then adjust as needed. All of us need to work with what we have, so set up your workspace as best as possible, knowing that yes, it's less than ideal, because if we didn't work from home during the pandemic, we could be, working from our kitchen tables or card tables or, our couches, etc. So consider what furniture you have to work with that'll be sturdy and comfortable as possible. look at having good lighting, try to minimize noise and distractions as best as possible. And then you also want to make it your own. So a way that I found will really help me work when I'm not in back-to-back meetings is having maybe some noise canceling headphones, listening to some white noise, adding some greenery, the plants, pictures, really just things that tend to make you happy. And try to have it as neat as possible. I think the big thing is, where possible, not have cords out and about where yourself or maybe those with you could trip on them, right? The other really important thing is staying connected. So stay in touch with others, whether that's through the phone, Zoom, social media, to really help make up for the daily face-to-face interaction that we used to do so much of. Make it a point to reach out to teammates and other stakeholders throughout the day. And outside of work, reaching out to friends and loved ones is very important as well. A few other things, thinking of how we spend so much time in our virtual meetings, is to think about pausing for others. Because when you're on the meetings, often it could be hard to find time to talk in a meeting. So ensure that all voices are given the opportunity to be heard. Try to be as inclusive as possible. And also monitor the meeting chat, because again, if not everyone can jump in and say something, there could also be others that are just more comfortable putting something into the chat, so monitor that as well. And something I'm finding more and more is to try to take control of what I'm calling like the Zoom meeting back-to-back syndrome. The whole hours and hours can go by where you're really not even getting a break. So not only scheduling the time, but maybe set the meetings for 55 minutes instead of an hour, for 25 minutes instead of a half an hour, to really give you a breather, and also those you're in meetings with, it allows them to take a quick break. And I think we all understand that life is happening around us, right? We have kids, pets, partners, they exist, and it's okay if they happen to make some noise in the background or show up on your camera if you're, broadcasting. And where folks are comfortable, like maybe they might even want to introduce them during one of the work meetings, right? So I've had that happen in some meetings. It was actually nice to see a little bit into, a person's home life, if you will. But otherwise, cats will walk across your keyboards, dogs will bark in the background, kids will make a guest appearance, your doorbell might ring when a package is dropped off to let you know that something's there. So we can't all have doors that will lock and we'll be in a soundproof room and not be interrupted. So, hey, we're human and we're doing the best that we can, but try to ensure you mitigate and have it as best as possible for you. And another thing is, with your employees, encourage them to share best practices around what's happening with them too. Another one is really diversifying your day. So quite often we're so engaged in what we're doing, like take the time to look up from what's urgent and really focus on what's important. So taking breaks and staying active, even if you need to book a bit of time into your calendar to stay active, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, take that time to, stretch and get a snack, do some deep breathing, or getting some of that fresh air if possible, because changing your setting is going to help you stay alert and it's going to recharge your motivation and really help promote more health. The other thing, although it might seem like a luxury, is to make time for personal development. So where you can, right, you might have, personal development goals that if you have the time to continue and take advantage of maybe any online courses that your employer may offer, or something that's out there on the internet that you did want to, pursue, to sort of pepper that into your day. Also, thinking of, doing good, helping others in your community, because when you do something like that, whether it's, picking up groceries for a neighbor who can't do it themselves, or maybe doing some baking, maybe from a work perspective, you do a bit of virtual mentoring, just giving back helps others, and obviously it helps us feel really good too. The other is really around maintaining your well-being. So looking at from a mental well-being perspective, I think right now a lot of us are going through various emotions, and feeling, anxious or angry or, alone is normal during times of uncertainty, especially for what we're going through. So try to stay attuned to what your mental and emotional state is, and seek out the support that's available to you when you're feeling that way. I mentioned a little bit about the physical well-being, so that goes with taking breaks and staying active during the day. And the other thing is really making time for lunch. Now, it might seem really obvious for me to say, but from a lot of other people I've been talking to as well, they're not doing this like they should either. It's just, go, go, go. So, reserve your 30 minutes in the middle of the day, try to have a healthy meal, and Even if you're used to eating out during the workday, it might be tough to do a little more than grab a granola bar or I'll say that bag of chips sometimes that I put on my desk to graze on, but really having that healthier lunch is going to serve us better in the long run, right? We just want to try to be as holistically as healthy as possible during this difficult time. So hopefully some of those tips have helped you today. Back to you, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'd now like to introduce Chantel Goldsmith, employment lawyer and partner. Chantel is a partner at Samfiru Tumarkin LLP and practices exclusively in the area of labor law and employment law. She graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree from Osgoode Hall Law School at York University in 2007, and her course emphasis was human rights and labor and employment law. Chantel prides herself in developing an emotional bond with each and every client, employer or employee. She has a balanced practice of acting on behalf of employers and employees, giving her the ability to know, anticipate, and counter opposing counsel's next move. Chantel, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for everybody for listening today. I just wanted to provide a little bit of a legal disclaimer that the information that I'm going to provide today does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. All the information provided is for general information only. And if you have any specific questions about any legal matter, you should consult your lawyer or other professional services provider or expert in the area.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Jason Roth. Jason's a CPA and a CA for Heidelberg Canada, Vice President of Finance and Operations, Business Partner of the Americas. At Heidelberg Canada, we handle sales and service of all Heidelberg equipment, as well as the sales and parts and a wide range of consumables for the Canadian printing industry. Our primary focus has always been on the commercial printers, but our exposure to packaging and label customers has grown dramatically over the past 5 to 10 years. Jason, if you'd like to say a few words.
Sure, thank you, Stephen, and welcome everybody. I hope you're all having a good afternoon. I'm going to take a more pragmatic approach, I think, than perhaps Susan was a little bit more of the soft and fuzzy variety on the human resources side, which makes sense. That's her expertise. I'm a little bit more focused on the specifics. So I'm going to take a couple minutes here just to go over some of the federal programs that are out there. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about what opportunities they have for business assistance during the COVID-19 pandemic. The first thing to mention, that webpage that's listed at the top of the slide that you can see is rather hard to remember and to type out. You don't have to write the whole thing down. Go to canada.ca/coronavirus and follow the links for financial support and financial support for businesses. And all of these things that I'm going to discuss this afternoon are all listed on that page. So they give you all the details there. So the first thing to talk about is the Canada Emergency Business Account, or CEBA, which is effectively assisting small businesses. It's a $40,000 loan, or up to $40,000 loan, of which $10,000 could be forgiven if certain activities are completed and milestones are met. And it's zero interest for the first 3 years. So it gives small businesses an opportunity to get some cash in hand to help cover the operation of their business during the pandemic. It's only for small businesses, so payroll companies with payroll of between 20,000 and 1.5 million. It's not an awful lot of money available for larger businesses, so it's really intended for small businesses. And you make your application through your bank, so contact your banker to discuss that program. So, Stephen, if you can go to the next slide. Sure. Thanks. In addition to the CEBA, there's also some co-lending programs. The biggest one is the Business Development of Canada, the BDC co-lending program for small and medium-sized enterprises. And those are for larger opportunities, larger loans for larger companies. And it has both a BDC and a government component. And again, you would apply for that through your bank to start with. The temporary wage subsidy was one of the first things that the federal government announced. It was a 10% reduction, or 10% subsidy against wages. It's intended for smaller businesses. It allows the employer to claim about $1,375 per eligible employee for a maximum of $25,000 per claim for the company. So again, it's focused primarily on smaller businesses, and it allows you to reduce your payroll withholding payments to the government, so you get to save the cash immediately, which was really good. The government was pretty much roundly criticized for the limited nature of this subsidy and the fact that it doesn't really provide an awful lot of use. Stephen, to the next slide. So the big subsidy that has been announced is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, or CEWS. This is the one that if you're an employer and you're not claiming this, if you're still paying any employees, then you're missing out. You really should be. The government said yesterday that in fact there's been very low uptake on this, which is surprising. Nonetheless, provides up to 75% of employee wages within certain restrictions if your company has had a reduction in revenues in the range of 30% or more. And it says on the slide there that it's for wages between March 15th to June 6th, and possibly going to be extended. They did announce last week that it will be extended for a further 3 months, I believe, so at least until the end of August. But the details of those additional periods has not been published yet, so we're still waiting for more information. Another program that's been announced and again is perhaps not as well taken as the government was hoping was the Canada Emergency Commercial Rental Assistance. This was offering rent relief of worked out to approximately 50% of the rent for small businesses. The limitation is that the landlord has to apply first, and then you get the benefit. So you should contact your landlord to see if they've applied, and if they have, then you should be able to gain some assistance there. Stephen, one more, please. The temporary changes to work sharing program. Work sharing is a program that's been out there for many years, but it allows you to take jobs and share them between individual employees. So one employee might work Mondays and Fridays, and another employee work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the two employees are sharing the same job. And it always allowed the employee to make an unemployment claim for the days they weren't working and get paid by you when they were working. It was very complicated, very difficult to apply, and very difficult to successfully implement the program. They have made changes to make it much easier to implement, to allow it to run for longer periods of time, and to get it approved much faster. So if that's something that you think is possible, then you should contact your lawyer or your payroll provider for additional assistance on how you might make an application for that. And then the last thing that's available for pretty much every company out there is that the federal government and certain provinces have allowed a deferral of payment of taxes, specifically sales taxes, but also some duties and import duties, and also some payments like payroll taxes in the province of Alberta and a few others, where the payments have been delayed. So instead of making a payment at the end of April or at the end of May, you can make that payment at the end of June or the end of July. And we're all hoping that gets extended out past the end of July or the end of June to a later period. And I think one more slide, and then I think I'm done. And then the last one is not affecting employers, it's affecting employees. And this is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. This is the $500 a week or $2,000 a month that's available to people who have lost income because of COVID-19. It's kind of a replacement for unemployment insurance during this pandemic. It does affect it does pay the employee directly. It doesn't assist the employer. But if you have laid off employees or put them on furlough where you're not paying them their salary for a period of time, this is something that they can apply and help to mitigate the loss to them. And I think that's all I have for now, Stephen. So if you want to take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. I do want to remind our attendees today that we are taking questions. Please submit them in the questions tab. We do have a few questions that we've already received that I'm going to pose to the panelists. As mentioned previously, if you wish a specific question directed to a specific panel member, just please indicate the panelists on the question and I will direct it there. If not, I'll open it up to the panel as a whole. The first question I have is for Chantel. Are seniority and possible severance package amounts projected to be affected by layoffs happening as a result of COVID-19? And if so, what do you anticipate?
So yes, there are a number of ways that severance packages are being affected by COVID-19. Firstly, let's talk about temporary layoff. A temporary layoff is when an employer temporarily cuts back or ceases an employee's employment with the understanding that the employee will be recalled within a certain period of time. Should the layoff exceed the maximum length of the applicable employment standards legislation, it will transform into a termination at law. One of the main things employers need to know about temporary layoffs is that in Ontario, while the legislation, the Employment Standards Act 2000, specifically addresses layoffs, this does not mean that employers have a freestanding right to temporarily lay off any employee they see fit. There must be something in a contract that has been signed or otherwise approved by the employee affording the employer this right. If there's no such contractual right and an employee imposes a temporary layoff on an employee, that employee is entitled to treat the layoff as a constructive dismissal. The employee will then be able to seek damages for wrongful dismissal, which could likely find an employer faced with a lawsuit. If this happens, the employee will be entitled to notice or pay in lieu of notice and or severance under the applicable employment standards legislation, and possibly under the common law as well, unless they have a binding termination provision in their employment agreements limiting their notice entitlement upon termination. Please note that if an employee is placed on temporary layoff during COVID-19, the employee may decide to agree to the temporary layoff if it lasts for only a short period of time. If the employee agrees to the layoff, then being placed on the layoff would not amount to constructive dismissal of employment. Second, I'd like to discuss a permanent termination of employment and how that's being affected by COVID-19. Generally, when an employee's employment is terminated, they have a duty to mitigate their damages by seeking out re-employment. The courts will typically reduce an employee's common law notice entitlement if the employee does not take adequate steps. Canada's unemployment rate has already climbed to approximately 10%, and economists predict that it's headed even higher. As the economies grind to a halt in an effort to slow the spread of COVID, this means that in terms of mitigation, there will be a lot more difficulty for employees attempting to secure re-employment because the competition for the positions will be at an all-time high. This can increase the amount of notice period the courts are willing to provide to employees based on the flooded jobless market, and employers will have a more difficult time arguing employees' failure to mitigate in defending a wrongful dismissal action.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chantel. The next question is for Sue. How can a company continue to keep their employees engaged while working from home? What would be some of the key areas that they could do so?
Yeah, for sure. So I was mentioning that, you know, obviously there's a number of things just in general, like if you communicate with the individuals, if you are, you know, focusing where they're, you know, working as comfortably from home, but obviously that's not enough, right? Communicating quite strongly with your employees, being transparent, sharing whatever you know as you know it is very important, right? People are hungry for information, and even if you don't have all the answers, you know, that's the time to bring up as much as you can. Also, having regular communications with their manager and senior leadership is very important, and however that's typically done at a company, whether it's via emails and one-on-ones, team meetings, organizational huddles, etc., and mixing all of that up so there's variety, but ensure that communications are paramount. Also, the top-down leadership is important as well. So we're talking even all the way to the CEO level, and having visibility is important during this time. Obviously, keeping the employee at the center of everything, focusing on health and safety has been very important from the beginning as well. And in some cases, that sort of guided companies on what they had to do from minute one in order to try to have things work as fast as possible during the pandemic. You'd also want to set expectations, but allow flexibility in an employee's day-to-day life to deal with, what they're having to deal with outside of work and what's often behind them in the other room, right? And that could include being, very flexible with start and stop times to see how your employees are also doing during that time. You can even do touch point surveys So something simple through SurveyMonkey. It doesn't have to be anything detailed and fancy, but just really to get a pulse on, how they're doing, what they would like to see, what your company's doing well, and what can be improved. That can further help drive initiatives. Also focusing on, training to your employees on topics that are really relevant at this time goes a long way. Things like stress management, how to sleep better, focusing on ergonomics, maybe information around homeschooling. I'd also suggest that you'd want to maybe go that extra mile and inject some fun and team building into your meetings where you can, and where obviously it can be done remotely. And it doesn't really need to be overly complicated either, and employees are often those that give the best ideas. Had situations where people say, hey, we're going to show up to this Zoom meeting and just wear, a funny hat, or, we're going to do a bit of a Pictionary on Zoom, or we're going to show our pets. Again, something simple, but something that, will help people be engaged. You might want to also look at theme days and do a little activity around that, maybe something around Motivational Mondays or Wellness Wednesdays or Thoughtful Thursdays. Just something to think about there. And I'd mentioned too, something else that helps us feel good as well is giving back to our local community. So maybe that's something through work that they might have, something that you can get engaged in, for example, like virtual mentoring. So just a few ideas around keeping the employees engaged.
Fantastic, thanks, Susan. Next question is for Jason. What are the tax implications for the businesses that receive subsidy support from the government when filing for the current fiscal year? Are there carryover opportunities or deferments?
That's an interesting question, and it was one actually that I had myself when Heidelberg Canada started looking into taking advantage of the Canada Employment Wage Subsidy. The wage subsidies that people are receiving are taxable income in the year that they're received. So they do take the place of other income. So they are taxable. At this point, they haven't announced that there's any deferral available or anything else. So regardless of when you receive it, it would be taxable income in the year that you do receive the income.
Fantastic. I have a question actually that's been submitted by our attendees. It's specified for Chantel, but it could also perhaps touch on Susan's area of expertise as well. If an employer asks an employee back to work after they were temporarily laid off because of the pandemic, what happens if the employees say they cannot return to work because they have children at home, and just as of yesterday, because schools are closed, the employer says they cannot return to work yet? What are the legal ramifications for the employer and the employee? Maybe we'll start with Chantel and see if Sue has.
Sure. So there's a new job protected leave under the Employment Standards Act in Ontario for employees that are providing care to their children because of closures to schools and daycares. So this means that if the employee is not able to return for that reason, that you are not able to terminate their employment, and you must allow them to continue to be off on that leave. It's an unpaid leave of absence, but they'd still be entitled to collect benefits through either EI or the CERB payment.
Okay, perfect. I'm not sure if there's any HR element to that, Susan, or if it's more so.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it could be the type of situation where the employer would allow them to maybe continue working from home or do some type of flexible work hours as they're continuing to work through what they need to deal with at home. So there could be an opportunity to do something outside of one of the unpaid leaves that Chantel mentioned. So it's good for the employer and employee to work together as best as possible when those requests come through.
Perfect. Next question is for Jason. Is a company that's part of a larger global group looked at as a Canadian business in Canada, thus being able to qualify for getting subsidies?
Another good question. Some yes and some no. So specifically, the 10% temporary wage subsidy that was first announced is only for what is defined as a Canadian controlled private corporation. So if you're a member of a global group, or you have a public company in Canada, or you have one of your owners is a public company either in Canada or elsewhere, then you would not be eligible for that 10% employment wage subsidy. Most of the other programs, though, are eligible for any employer, and so the 75% wage subsidy for instance, is eligible for any company in Canada. So public company, private company, owned part of a global group, or a sole proprietorship. All of those are entities which are eligible for that. So do look into the details of it on the canada.ca/coronavirus website.
Fantastic. Next question is for Chantel. If an employee refuses to come to work during the pandemic, what are the employer's rights on how to deal with this situation? This could either be based on fear of contracting COVID or an unwillingness to do work other than the current job description.
If an employee has to have a reasonable basis for the refusal for work. So if it doesn't fit into one of the protected leave provisions in the Employment Standards Act, they'd have to provide a legitimate reason to the employer, and the employer would then have to provide the work refusal to the Ministry of Labor for them to look into the matter and do an investigation to determine whether or not that refusal to work is reasonable in the circumstances. So they'd be looking for things like if the employer is not providing proper PPE equipment, if there's going to be public engaging for that individual, or for interactions with other employees. That's really the biggest thing that they'd be looking for at this point in time. Or if the employee is unwell and fits into one of the criterias for the job protected leave, they'd have that right to refuse work as long as it is within the provisions of the leave and still be able to continue with their employment with the company.
Okay, very interesting, perfect. I guess the next question is for Susan. What about an employee's physical well-being? Is there something a company or an employee can do during this time? I guess if working remotely or either in plant.
So when we're looking at physical well-being, yes. So certainly there's a number of companies that do have wellness resources that are out there, but it's interesting, when I talked to some other folks, they didn't even realize certain things were even out there. So often it will be, well, gosh, well, find out what's there, and certainly as employers promote that you even have these resources and maybe consider enhancing them, right? Maybe it could be company paid access to reputable wellness or an exercise site. Certainly to point to other fitness resources that are available online and apps. A number of them are free, because I know things are tight right now, so employers don't necessarily have the additional money to invest in other things. But other items are promoting breaks away from the computer screen, or just, you know, if they're working on the line or something, to be able to go out and get fresh air, get some vitamin D. For those that are working more remotely, you can think about virtual group activities. So, you know, maybe it's a virtual walking club where people are logging their steps with their fitness tracker and keeping one another accountable and motivated. Maybe when you're having those virtual meetings, incorporating a quick stretch break. You know, even if it's one of those where, you know, you're stretching your neck, you're just standing up, stretching your arms, and it's amazing that people will go, they appreciate it, right? Because it could be the only time they've had in the last couple of hours to even move around. You could look at doing little events around theme days, like a Wellness Wednesday. And also thinking about employees working from home and not having the best office set up as compared to, you know, their regular office, is look at ergonomic training. So it could be an in-house presentation, maybe you have some specialists on staff or reputable websites. I did notice that the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, so the CCOHS, has a lot of free information and articles available about a number of ergonomic related topics. And I noticed that they now have available a 1-hour office ergonomics course that's been made free of charge during the pandemic. So you can basically just go to their site, look that up, and you could register. That would be helpful as well. And of course, for those of us that are, you know, working day to day and not necessarily moving like we need to, is get up, move, and stretch at least once an hour. When I was in one of the meetings, they talked about the most optimal being, you know, 20 minutes of sitting, 8 minutes of standing, and 2 minutes of moving. Like, that's the optimal. Like, I admit I'm still pretty suboptimal when it comes to that, but at the end of the day, just try to move. Try not staying slouched over in the same position for hours. And if that means set reminders, definitely do that. Another thing, certainly with those of us who are staring at our computer screens, perhaps much longer than we were before, is the 20-20-20 rule. And that is that, every 20 minutes, focus on something at least 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And that gives your eyes a bit of a break. Of course, eating is very important, and having that healthy lunch will help your blood sugar and your mind. And just even as your day starts to wrap up, try to limit that screen time, especially before bed. That will help set the stage for a better sleep for you. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Jason, I have a question here. This is, I guess, sometimes more specific to the actual role you serve, I guess, at the business at Heidelberg. But what effects has COVID-19 and ensuing economic issues had with your ability to maintain a full workforce and full services in your business?
That's a good question. It's something that that my colleagues and I have had to spend pretty much every waking hour thinking about and working on over the past couple of months. As have most other business owners and business managers. It's a really difficult time. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the 75% of employee salaries, has basically allowed Heidelberg Canada to maintain all of its workforce without having to lay people off. Without that 75%, we were looking at having to lay off a large number of our employees, because our revenues, like most of our customers' revenues, have basically disappeared over the past 8 weeks. So without that wage subsidy, we would have been looking at significant layoffs. So that's what we have used. We don't qualify for most of the, as a part of a global group, we don't qualify for most of the small business incentives, the loan programs and things like that. And other companies in the Heidelberg Group around the world are taking other initiatives. There's a lot of programs. A lot of companies are using short time work, so they furlough employees 2 days a week or 3 days a week, or they're doing full layoffs of departments if necessary to keep the company alive.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I just have a follow-up question for Susan. I'm asking if you could please repeat the information for the ergonomics webinar or website information.
Oh, for sure. Yes, it's the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, CCOHS. And when you log on, you'll see a bunch of information around ergonomics in particular. And then there is an area that says to take the free ergonomics course.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. The next question is for Chantel. It might be a two-parter. As an owner, what are my limitations in reducing benefits, retirement contributions, and other HR benefits? And what are my limitations on forcing my staff to take vacation days?
So this is definitely a two-parter here. So first of all, with regards to the reduction in benefits, retiree contributions, and other HR benefits, employers need to review their contracts of employment, which may provide them with the right to reduce the employee's further benefits of employment without notice for a set period of notice. If the employer does not have employment contracts with its employees allowing them to do so, the employer needs to ensure that it does not make significant changes which would amount to constructive dismissal of the employee's employment. So typically, constructive dismissal is a reduction of 10% or more per annum in any change in remuneration for that employee. And a constructive dismissal occurs when an employer makes changes to the terms of the employee's employment without the employee's authorization or consent, or if not otherwise allowed through an employment contract. With regards to the limitations on forcing vacation days, the legislation confirms that the employers have the right to decide when an employee will take vacation. So the Ontario Employment Standards Act reads that employers shall determine when an employee shall take her vacation for a vacation entitlement year, subject to the following rules. Number one, the vacation shall be completed no later than 10 months after the date of the vacation entitlement year for which it's given. And number two, the vacation shall be a 2-week period or 2 periods of 1 week each, unless the employee requests in writing that the vacation be taken in shorter periods and the employer agrees to that request. So absent any contractual provisions to the contrary, it is within the scope of management to control the scheduling and determine the vacation periods for their employees.
Interesting. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I have another question here for Susan. What can companies and or managers do to better support their employees during this time when they're not in-house? Or even, I guess, technically could be even if they were on physical distancing in an employment facility.
Yeah, so I talked earlier about obviously to support employees when it comes to the physical side. But it's interesting when I think of that about how can companies support individuals. I also think of managers, breaking that down. So like how a company can help managers, because managers are people too, and they're also going through all of this at the same time that their employees are. So in some ways, it's an even harder job for them because they really need to lead during this time. So I think to help managers, the company can provide, manager focus, manager only training on maybe certain toolkits that they put together or on timely topics, maybe such as how to deal with a mobile workforce, right? If they're in a situation where they now have all their employees working from home. Also providing advanced communications to managers about important topics that are going out to the employees whenever possible. Because I think sometimes we'll get communications, they'll be through email, and then managers are seeing them at the exact same time that the employees are. So where possible on those important topics, if managers can get them in advance, because that really helps them digest the news. They can ask questions and be prepared to help their employees better. And then if you look at from a manager and how they can also help their employees, it's really, showing that as a team, they're all in this together. We are all in this together as a team. So the manager can, lead by example and demonstrate that it is okay to work flexible hours, and there's things that you need to look after in life during this unprecedented time. And it doesn't mean, say, staring at your computer screen for 9 to 5, every day without taking breaks or doing what you need to do. And that could also lead to focusing on, the results versus the hours worked. But as a manager, also reinforcing the expectations, but again, allowing some flexibility, being a sounding board, being available, checking in regularly with the employees through one-on-ones as well, because it's one thing to have team meetings, but also to do the one-on-ones. And also share some of the programs that are available that the company has to help employees during this time, such as the employee assistance program or other training that is available. I really think can further help them support their employees during this time.
Excellent. The next question is for Chantel. If a company closes during the pandemic, and this might have been touched on a little bit in what some of the other answer, but I know there's a lot of questions regarding the legal implications here. If a company closes during the pandemic, how long before an employee is considered severed? And what kind of severance package would an employer have to pay if the job is no longer available due to financial strain to the company because of the pandemic?
So it depends on the temporary layoff, whether the employer continued to provide benefits or not. So if an employer continues to provide benefits to their employees while on temporary layoff, that can go on for up to 35 weeks within the 1-year period. And then at that 35-week mark, if they're not recalled back to work, then that would be when the termination would be triggered. You'd have to look at the individual's employment contracts to see if they've limited their notice entitlements in their termination provisions of the contract. If not, they would be entitled to the common law notice period. And that's based off of the individual's age, their length of service, their ability to secure reemployment, and the nature of their position. The other option for employers on temporary layoff is to not provide benefits to their employees during that period of time. And that means that they'd have an obligation after the 13-week mark. So that's 1-3. After 13 weeks, if the individual is not recalled, then that's when the termination would be effective.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Next question is for Jason. And I know this may possibly be impossible to nail down to an exact percentage, but hypothetically, what percentage of small businesses do you feel will not be able to survive during this prolonged closure, since it's extended far beyond what was initially thought?
Oh, yeah, no, I don't have a hard number. I can't give you a specific percentage at all. The economists, the forecasts that I have read are clearly indicating that there's a severe strain being placed, particularly on small businesses, And we see that within the commercial print area specifically, that smaller print shops are really struggling at this point in time. How many of those are going to survive? How many are not going to survive? I couldn't tell you that. The Conference Board of Canada has a free website that has some very interesting economic information specifically related to the impacts of COVID, and they break it down by major metropolitan area in addition to federally and provincial level. So if you're interested in that, you might have a look and see what the Conference Board of Canada economists think is happening in your metropolitan area, and the impact on small businesses in your area. I think you might find that interesting.
Perfect. And actually, there's just another follow-up question that came in for that too. How do you see the government supporting the market impact and trade impact of print post COVID-19?
So far, we've been left out, to be honest. There's been talk about support for specific industries, obviously the frontline workers and the long-term care centers, but also there's been talk of support for the oil sector, for the airlines. Not an awful lot of talk about print and publishing being an essential service that they want to see continued. There hasn't been an awful lot of emphasis on that at all. There's been a little bit of scuttlebutt that maybe there's some support for publishing industries, and maybe that's newspapers and things, but nothing official has been announced, and I haven't seen anything really of any substance. So at this point, I don't see anything specific to our industry in terms of support from the federal or provincial governments right now.
Okay, thank you. Chantel, the next question is for you. What happens when a company starts to bring back employees in increments, but still has people laid off? Do they lose previous eligibility in terms of subsidies?
That depends on the subsidies that they're receiving from the government, and I'll leave Jason to comment on that component of it. But they are entitled to bring back employees on a staggered approach. So from my understanding is they don't have an obligation to bring everybody back and can stagger it in based off of the phased in opening of the businesses, especially for businesses that have been mandated closed. So there isn't, it's not an all or nothing from my understanding.
Jason,
yeah, Chantel, I think in terms of a gradual payback or gradual return to work, the Canada Employment Wage Subsidy, for instance, the 75% subsidy is based on wages being actually paid. So if the company has laid off, let's say, all of their employees or the majority of their employees, they wouldn't be entitled to the wage subsidy because they aren't paying them. As they start to bring them back, then they would start to be eligible for the 75% recovery for those employees they are bringing back. So it's definitely important to take a close look at the subsidy rules that are out there.
Perfect. The next question is for Susan. What can companies do to focus on an employee's mental health during these very challenging times?
Yes, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about the physical, but we know that the mental health is very, very important. So, you know, from the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of focus from the World Health Organization on how to keep us from contracting and spreading the virus. But we know that focusing on our mental health is important too. I was looking at some new data from the Canadian Mental Health Association, and it was showing that the majority of Ontarians believe that a mental health crisis will follow COVID-19, this whole impact, right? I mean, we're more isolated than ever, and it's normal to feel a whole range of things that we may feel on an hourly, daily basis, stress, anxiety, etc. So from an employee standpoint, certainly I would suggest that companies should promote their employee assistance program if they have one available, and any other mental health type programs that may be available to them as well. And you know, if that's available in-house, then I would certainly encourage employees to proactively reach out to those resources, maybe even before what they're facing becomes, you know, a full-blown and more ingrained, you know, matter that they're going to need to deal with. So, you know, being proactive is important there. Certainly a company can promote company benefits that they have available, maybe as part of their plans, such as maybe there's coverage for counseling. Certainly reminding employees to contact their primary care provider or another trusted advisor professional if they need help coping with things such as excessive stress, anxiety, or any other concerns. A company may also want to consider bringing in any external speakers where possible to talk about mental health, or promote other reputable sites out there like the Canadian Mental Health Association, because I was noticing there, you can get information, a smattering of information from them that's very helpful, but they're offering sort of free call-in counseling during the pandemic and really great articles that you can read. You could also promote other phone numbers that are out there. Maybe there's local crisis management or distress hotlines, an Ontario mental health line, and of course, Kids Help Phone. Wellness Together Canada has resources out there that really is meant to help, us as individuals take care of both our physical and mental health. You can, as an employer, focused on maybe training or activities on the job. Maybe it could be, hey, we're taking a not medication, that was a slip, do some sort of mindfulness, meditation, deep breathing, just focus on taking regular breaks. Also promoting the flexibility I mentioned earlier about, modeling that. And that's important that employees see it's important, and that, as they see their managers or others around them doing that, to look after themselves, that goes a long way as well. And also share positive company or employee stories. Highlight some good news in the media, because I think at the beginning of this as well, there was, maybe a lot of negative that we were hearing, right? If you asked for your news flash in the morning and the first thing was, hey, this is how many people have COVID, or this is how many people have passed away from it, and it could become very negative. So really, focusing on the positive is important as well for mental health.
Fantastic. The next question, I'd start with Chantel for her answer to this, but it could also impact both Susan and Jason's companies as well. What protection measures am I required to take for staff that work in teams, and how should these measures be documented to protect my business? So I'll start with Chantel, perhaps.
To follow the public health guidelines to prevent the spread of COVID. This includes things such as posting signage to remind customers and employees about physical distancing. So trying to encourage the 6 feet distance between employees where possible. Display posters promoting hand washing and respiratory hygiene. Offer delivery or curbside pickup if possible, if you're customer focused. Help a physical distancing plan. So think about how you'll maintain distance between customers and employees, and display the details of the plan clearly throughout the business and at the entrance if possible. Ensure disinfecting tissues and alcohol-based hand sanitizer are available. And lastly, follow cleaning and disinfection guidelines for public settings. So this includes frequent cleaning of public spaces and frequently touched surfaces.
Perfect. Susan and Jason, perhaps in your own businesses, is there anything to lay?
I think Chantel had a real good answer. I'm not going to add anything to that.
Fantastic.
Well, HR and legal always work together, so I'll add a little bit, but absolutely Chantel had a fabulous answer. Thinking even, internally, other things that you may want to do is, getting your health and safety committee involved. Getting them to assist where possible. There's other things you would maybe need to implement internally, like around, contact tracing, and when it was mentioned about obviously needing to have the deep cleaning protocols as well. So there's obviously, cleaning around the high touch areas, even if you're looking at, CDC guidelines. But, if there is an issue that comes up, like your partnership with the real estate or the building to help that deep cleaning will be very, very, very important. as well. And I think the government too, out on the various sites, it does talk about certain guides out there to say, hey, when you are bringing people back, or when you have, like, here's some ideas on what you want to take into account from an employer standpoint. And I would expect to a number of employers are building that into, if they haven't already, sort of their crisis management or pandemic management plans too. Thank you.
Perfect. Next question I have is actually directed for Chantel. It kind of bookends to this one that we just had. Can you require employees to use biometric time locks if hand sanitizer is provided?
Yes, you can do so. So I don't want to dissuade employers from using biometric time clocks. I think it's a good way to have accountability for their employees. So we've all heard from reputable sources, though, that the coronavirus remains on surfaces for hours, and that would include on biometric time clocks. So employees' personal health could be at risk when using frequently touched screens and fingerprint scanners if they're not disinfected properly after each use. So my suggestions are for employers that want to continue to use the biometric time clocks, that they follow the public health guidelines again for those devices by ensuring that all the screens and scanners of the devices are disinfected with cleaning spray or wipes after each use, and encouraging employees to wash their hands for at least 20 seconds or use alcohol-based hand sanitizer immediately after using one.
Perfect. I have one question that came in from the attendees. I think we touched on parts of it before, but if there's anything to add, please let me know, panelists. For businesses mandated closed, what are the implications if companies slowly start to open while following safe protocols? So I believe we touched on some of this, but I just want to make sure that I didn't miss.
I think we're all afraid to answer, Stephen. No, go ahead, Chantel.
Yeah. I was just trying to mention, I just want to make sure that we have all of the, you're following the public health guidelines with regards to sanitization and hygiene practices within the employer, and providing any necessary equipment like PPE if necessary, and they have that public interfacing or that team environment where they're in closer proximity to each other.
Perfect. Great. Question is for Jason here. It says, are there any government subsidies for companies that remained open during the pandemic, as other companies such as airlines are being paid for the employees for the most part to stay home?
Yeah, absolutely. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy is the prime example of that, where the employer is getting 75% up to, there's some caps involved, but 75% of the employee wages. It's a maximum of $847 per employee per week to pay the employees, regardless of whether those employees are being paid to stay home or are paid to work from home partially, or are being paid to come into the facility and actually do the job regularly. So as long as you're still paying them, then you're entitled to recover 75% of what you paid them.
Perfect. And I have one question here that could also be possibly for Chantel and maybe Susan, I'm not sure, but if we're calling employees and applying for the CEW benefits to supplement their wages, what sort of make work duties are acceptable?
Significant changes to an employee's duties. So they have to continue to have employees do their jobs. You don't want to cause them to be demeaned or humiliated by performing work that's beneath the role that they had previously been providing, because that may risk a constructive dismissal claim. So we have to ensure that you try and keep to the best as possible in keeping their duties and responsibilities as they are. I know that that's not necessarily going to be possible with the phased in opening, and they may have to take on additional duties or responsibilities than they previously did, or have some of the duties that they performed taken away temporarily for a period of time. But you just want to be careful. My best suggestion in this case would be constant communication with the employees. So to explain to them exactly what's happening, and for them to have an understanding that this is just for a gradual period of time. It's not going to be an indefinite change to their duties and responsibilities. It may just need to occur for that temporary period while the phased-in reopening is happening.
Oh, okay. Perfect, thank you. I have a question to the panel as a whole that's from some from our attendees here. What actions are companies obliged to take if some of their staff travel extensively on business? I know this has impacted me personally in my role. I'll open it up to the panel as a whole. Anyone can weigh in.
So again, it comes down to protecting the employees as much as you can. You want to ensure that you're providing necessary equipment to those employees who are traveling. So perhaps providing them with disposable gloves or disposable face masks to ensure that they're wearing them while traveling or while in the airport settings. And asking, like if they're, for example, refusing to travel during this time, seeing if you can accommodate them by having other virtual ways for them to produce what they need to produce. So whether that's having sales employees meet with potential customers virtually through Zoom meetings, or doing everything where possible to try and accommodate the individuals to ensure that they feel comfortable with travel.
Susan,
it could be that certain companies also may have built into their even temporary policies during this time, if an individual is, traveling out of country, that when they do come back, they would almost need to just self-isolate, right, to be extra careful during that time too. So I think that, as Chantel mentioned, if things could be done, virtually or remotely to get the work done during this time, it just, I think it's an easier situation just due to what we're having to experience right now.
Jason, do you have anything to add, or?
No, not really. I think that, I can speak from personal experience. We had employees who were out of the country working on installations in the United States during when the initial borders began to close and the initial lockdowns happened, and when they came back to Canada, we asked them to self-isolate for 14 days and didn't send them out to see any other customers. So these are the types of things that we're doing to keep our employees safe. So yeah, what Chantel and Susan said were the right things.
Oh, fantastic. There is a follow-up question from our attendee as well, saying, is the company liable if the employee contracts COVID while traveling on business?
So this comes down to the due diligence of this comes down to the due diligence of the company. So offering the employee other alternatives of travel is a good option, as well as, like I said, providing the personal protection equipment to try to dissuade them contracting anything as much as possible. And liability would only be if there's any potential permanent impairment as a result. Just contracting the virus alone, I don't think would lead to any sort of liability issues for the company. It's more if there's a permanent impairment or a death or something like that arose with the company not taking the necessary due diligence to protect the employee's well-being.
Susan, do you have anything to add, or from an HR point of view, or?
That's perfect. Thanks, Chantel.
Oh, fantastic. This is another question from our attendees to the whole. It says, as the commercial segment slowly comes back to work, how far away do you think your companies are to bringing everyone back? Do you see bringing people back in a staggered fashion? I guess that would depend on physical distancing opportunities within business segments, but please, all three of you, feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to what the organization's business continuity plan is, right? With keeping health and safety, paramount. How is the office set up that you can maintain the physical distancing? Are companies not going to need to consider, for example, people working staggered shifts or coming in at different start and stop times, getting into the office? What does that look like? What about the protective equipment, PPE that will be available for them, extra hand sanitizing stations? And there's just a lot that needs to be considered as people start phasing back into work. And I know a number of companies too are sort of taking the approach on, okay, if they're sort of functioning well enough from home in the meantime, and we're still in a time of crisis, then maybe that's going to continue for a while longer. And then when it's time, maybe it's only the critical people will start to go back based upon their role and move from there. So I personally think it could be quite a long time till offices will get back to where they were before, by having like full complements, right? Because of all the things we need to do. Just an example, one of the buildings that I'm working with, looking at with our contingency plans on bringing people back, and it was, well, we have to have obviously things in place on the floor, on the flow of traffic. We need to ensure no more than 2 people are going to go on the elevator at once. And yes, we have extra sanitizing stations. So when you start making the list of all that needs to be done, it actually becomes a little overwhelming. Another reason why you need to work with a lot of stakeholders to ensure that you're doing the right thing when it does get to the point of, people coming back in, whether it's in bits and drabs or getting to maybe a little more of a normal course situation.
Is Chantel or Jason, do you have any points to add?
I think you can hit everything from my perspective of things that we're discussing even as an employer as well. So my entire firm has been working remotely now for the last 8 weeks. Even though we are an essential service and we're allowed to attend in office, we haven't. So we moved all 70 plus of our employees to remote access on our computers. We all do everything from home now, and I think that this will go on. My best guess is I don't see our office actually having people in the office until probably September, October is my best guess. And even then, I think it will be a staggered approach of having shifts or having only the essential people who need to be in office there at that period of time.
And I'll only add that exactly what Chantel said, that Heidelberg Canada has basically done the same thing, except for our production employees and our warehouse employees. All of the office staff and sales staff have been working from home completely, and we see that continuing for some time yet. I don't want to put a date on it yet, but certainly for the foreseeable future.
Fantastic. I'll just pose the one last question that I had come in from the attendees, and then I'll start to wrap up for the day. But the question is posed in packaging. It's 2 parts: how to keep employees safe, says disposable gloves question, or how to keep customers safe and satisfied. Guess that might be more perhaps in terms of Heidelberg, in terms of packaging, perhaps in terms of packaging printing. I'm just trying to extrapolate what the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chantel and Susan have touched on a lot of this already in terms of examining the workforce and the workplace and making sure that physical distancing measures are taken, that appropriate signage is there to remind people of hand sanitization and staying separate from each other, and putting in place measures to keep customers and other visitors to the plant separate from your employees, so that you don't risk the transmission of COVID at this point. But I don't have anything specific for the packaging industry or even for printers specifically. I think it really depends on the size and the scope of your workplace.
Fantastic. At this point, I'd like to allow my panelists time for some closing thoughts, and then I will begin to sign off the webinar. If anyone would like to say anything?
Great. Okay. So certainly, I think we all agree this is an unprecedented time. There's really not a playbook for us on pandemics to say, thou shalt do this step by step, right? So we're learning as we go. We're learning from what we did or didn't do. We're learning from other countries. So each day brings something new, and even from what our government puts out, right? There's constant change in information and adapting happening. But one thing I did want to share, I was in a meeting the other week where what one of the speakers talked about stood out for me. We're all used to saying that we're in the same boat, but although the outside of our boat might look the same, what we have inside our boats is very different. So our boats can be filled with us trying to look after our family, we're working, not having anyone at home, losing our jobs and so much more, right? We have good days and we have not so good days. We have very different personal experiences in what we're doing, and we're doing the best we can. So maybe it's not saying we're all in the same boat. Maybe it's better said that we are all weathering the same storm together. So with that being said, I do wish all of you to stay very safe and healthy, and we will get through this.
Chantel, if you'd.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Susan. I think that we're seeing a completely novel and unprecedented time, and this is something that we don't have all the answers to. Even as experts in our fields, we're giving our best advice in these circumstances based off of our opinions and based off of what we're hearing from government resources and whatnot. But nobody knows all the answers, and that's an unfortunate reality when it comes down to case law as well. So even if something were to go to court off of a frustration of contract or a constructive dismissal or any of those kind of situations, that we don't even know how the courts are going to be dealing with the situation because it's something that's completely novel and we haven't experienced it before. So there's going to be lots of questions, and as experts, we're going to help and try and guide everybody to the best of our ability, but we don't know all of the answers because it is so new to everybody. I also want to pass along my best wishes that everybody stays safe and healthy, yourselves and all your loved ones during these times, and thank you very much for listening.
And sorry, Stephen, I'll just add to what Chantel said is you know, absolutely correct that there nobody has all of the answers, but reach out to those that already advise you in your business, whether that's your legal support, your payroll support, your bank. Reach out to them and ask them for help if you still need guidance or if you need anything else. And wish everybody to stay safe and be healthy. And thanks for listening today.
I'd like to thank all of the panelists on behalf of myself and the Digital Imaging Association. I also want to remind our attendees that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Digital Imaging Association members site. It will have all of our panelists' information there as well too. It'll be a great resource. I'd like to also thank our sponsors for the DIA, our platinum sponsors EFI, HP, Konica Minolta, Print Action, Spicers, and Xerox, and our gold sponsors Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, Heidelberg, and I'd also like to notify people that we've actually postponed our golf tournament in light of the current condition until Thursday, September the 24th. It will again be at St. Andrews Valley in Aurora. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you found it educational and fun. Thanks very much. Take care, everyone.